Story time. We're going to talk about a wild time in my life. This is a story that I've carried with me for quite some time. Every time I find myself talking about it, I'm feeling like I have to preface it with like the entire rest of my life in order to try to explain, to help people understand how I could even get into this type of situation in the first place. Because otherwise, it doesn't look the best for me. But you know what? I've learned to accept that. I don't need everything to make me look great. I'm learning how to accept that rarely am I going to look that great unless I'm just being honest and vulnerable. But that's the best that I have to offer, rather. And if that's the best I have to offer, why would I offer anything else? So it took me a long time to also heal from this in order to be able to communicate it in a way where I'm speaking from a healed perspective, not one that's trying to like judge or call anybody out. That was quite a process. Okay. Sorry, I've been eating all day and these nuts are really good. Okay. So I'm going to preface it just a bit in order to move into the story. I think I'll end up actually talking about things afterwards. And just to be clear, again, this story isn't to call anybody out. It isn't to make anybody out to be some type of monster or to make anybody feel any type of shame or anything like that. I'm going to try to communicate in a way where any of that is going to be a personal effect, something I can take on myself. I do feel like my experiences are important to share. I feel like I've been gifted with the capacity to be able to share my experiences in a way that most people aren't, and I take that seriously. I take that as a sign of the necessity of me sharing these types of things. Again, not to make me out to be any type of way or make anybody else to be out any type of way, but to hopefully educate people, to let people see that these things really do happen, and to potentially help anyone who's been in a similar situation. What I've found with a lot of my trauma that's made it so hard to process in the first place and so hard to talk about things in the first place is that you always end up feeling so isolated in those experiences. Well, maybe other people have been assaulted, but they wouldn't have ended up in this exact situation because they would have known better, sort of deal. Or nobody else has experienced this type of abuse. Those things are way too common because in my experience, as I've been able to communicate my experiences this way, I've found that there are a lot of people who can relate on a lot of different levels. And a lot of people tend to be encouraged but amazed that I can talk about these things when they're like, I didn't know that anybody else would understand or that anybody else has been through these types of things. And I hate to hear that. I love to hear it. If I'm somebody that is offering something that nobody else is offering you, I'm very happy to offer that. But at the same time, I hate that concept for the fact that the only reason I'm coming across that way is likely because I've learned how to communicate these things, not because I'm the only one going through these things. I don't think I'm so special that way. I think that many of my even most traumatic experiences have been shared with a much larger collective that just isn't given to communicating these things so vulnerably. And I would like to change that. So if anything, I hope that this is what this type of communication will bring. When I talk about any of the things that I talk about, that's really the point. It's just to put my shit out there as vulnerably as possible because I have nothing to hide, and so that other people can feel comfortable in their own skin. Realizing that if somebody like me can experience all these different things, have all these different thoughts and feelings and different types of experiences, that they're not alone and it's okay for them too, right? If I can love myself after all of this, then hopefully I can help others to be able to do the same. So, okay, I had been married in 2012. It was a toxic relationship. It was not a good marriage. We loved each other, but we didn't actually really know what love really was. We were very immature, and we had trauma bonded, essentially. We had grown up in the same Christian school for a period of time. He was my brother's best friend back in high school, and then my older brother dated his older sister. So we just grew up in this weird little culty thing, and we kind of shared that, right? And so we kind of fell into a relationship that way, actually, when my brother was dating his sister, which I know is so weird for a lot of people, but that's what happens when you grow up in weird, tiny little culty religious circles. Those types of things don't seem weird in those circles. So it wasn't a great relationship. We were very toxic for each other. I ended up gaining a whole bunch of weight, stopped really taking care of myself because I was trying to take care of him. He was, we were both working full time, but all of my money was going to paying bills. He was making twice as much as I was making and was paying half the bills, but then had all of this excess money that he was using to go to the strip club. And he was never faithful to me, and I had cheated on him once prior to us getting married. So it was not a healthy relationship. It wasn't a good relationship. He ended up, he was a drinker, but while we were married, got to the point where, he was incredibly sick. He was incredibly ill. He was like 6'2", over 6 feet tall, and had gotten down to 125 pounds. He was incredibly ill for a time. So when we separated, and I was, on the verge of suicide. I was just keeping myself constantly distracted. So we were very unhealthy with each other. It was the best thing for both of us to separate. Now it took, we got married in 2012, at the very end of 2012, before the end of the world. And then even by the middle of 2013, honestly, even right at the beginning, the relationship was kind of already dead. By the time we got married, it was almost like the marriage was like, might as well have been a funeral. And we ended up actually separating in the spring of 2014. And I ended up moving into my car and living out of my car for a time while I was working. I was sleeping on the rocks on the coast of Lake Michigan, in Kenosha. I had gone and just was staying in Kenosha because that's where my friends were at the time, and I was actually getting into the music scene there. Nobody knew that I was homeless. I didn't let anybody know that I was living out of my car at the time. I was 24, and there was just a lot. There was a lot. I was trying, when I had gotten married, I started moving away from my family to a degree. But then my family became like a way to move away from my relationship. I got in the relationship in order to try to get away from my family a bit. But then when the relationship wasn't working out, I found myself using my family to kind of bridge that gap personally. And neither of those relationships were healthy. And so then once I moved into my car, I kind of just completely isolated. I was also doing coke at the time. I picked up doing coke after we had separated, and kind of just felt like, fuck it. I was already kind of on my way down, spiraling mentally. And there was about two or 3 months that I was on coke pretty heavy until my coke dealer, who was an actual friend of mine, was like, listen, I'm not giving you any more. I don't care how much money you're trying to give me. I don't care about your money. You're killing yourself, and I can't let you do that. An actual friend. I know most people don't find that in a coke dealer, so I lucked out that way. For sure. At that point, I kind of just had hit a rock bottom. That was kind of rock bottom for me, I think, to a lot of degrees. I've hit different rock bottoms, don't get me wrong, but that was probably my rock bottom mentally, to some degree. I just didn't want my parents to know. I hadn't told anybody that we were separating. I don't think anybody knew at the time, and then I think people started to assume that there was something wrong, just because I wasn't engaging in things and kind of had completely isolated myself. And then once I was living in my car, there was about, because I lived in my car even for several months, and there was about a month and a half where I maintained my jobs during that period of time, but then I quit the one because it was affiliated with my ex-husband and his family, and then ended up quitting the other, just because I was spiraling. And at the time that I quit those jobs, then I quickly ran out of money. I had spent it all on coke. And when my dealer realized as a friend that didn't have any more money, like I was down to like literally like my last $70. And I think I made some comment about that because I had been high all weekend with them and was like, who even cares? It's just my last money or whatever. And he's like, well, aren't you still working? And I was like, no, I quit those jobs. And he would like, then I kind of broke down about how I was living out of my car. And he's like, I can't let you do this. I can't let you be like this. Like, how can I help you? Definitely not going to let you do any more coke. And I'm so thankful for that, to be honest. I really, really am, because I didn't care about myself at the time. And he cared more about me than I cared for myself. And that was extremely kind of him. But yeah, at some point my family found out that that's essentially how I was living. And my mom convinced me to move back home with them, which was like the last thing in the world I wanted to do. The reason I was so desperate to get into this relationship with somebody who'd never even cared for me to begin with was because I was just trying to get away from my family. And I had yet to truly understand where those emotions were coming from or why. But it was around this time that I really started to, well, it was even after my friend died in 2013 that I really started to understand why I was trying to stay away from my family. And at that point I began to isolate from them, and I really didn't want to be around them at all. But my mom had convinced me essentially to move back in with them, and against my better judgment even. I mean, I don't know what else I would have done, but I just did not want to be there. It felt extremely unhealthy and toxic for me to be there as well. But I did move back in with my parents, and then I immediately just started selling all my things. I had still had my stuff in a storage. I had my stuff in a storage unit and in my car. And at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get rid of everything, and I'm going to go off onto the road with like a backpack, which I have done since, by the way. But this was back when I was 24, and that had kind of been something since I was about 17 or 18. I had talked about being able to go backpacking or kind of being a hippie that way, bit of an extremist, kind of getting rid of all of my things to become a minimalist, and living off of pure ambition and whatever skills I could learn along the way. That had been a dream of mine for a time, was to kind of forsake money, forsake society in its standards at the time, and to be able to go off with, like I said, essentially just a bag, and then offer myself, you know, to learn how to do yard work, to learn how to do farm work, to learn how to do, you know, whatever sort of house caregiving, any of that kind of stuff that I could do. At the time, I wasn't terribly skilled. I'd done retail, and that was about it. And I wanted to learn these life skills, and I wanted to be able to learn how to do all these things, and I wanted to offer my capacity to learn and willingness to actually work very hard in exchange for housing and potentially even a paycheck, and kind of just live that way and just kind of move around and find myself, and maybe even build some sort of migrant community that lived that way, right? Now, this is before I was aware that this is like actually a thing that a lot of people do. I had no idea. I was very sheltered. So these kind of just seemed like wild concepts to me at the time. I didn't realize that there was like very legitimate things that you could do in that way. To me, it seemed like this grand ambition that nobody else had thought of in the small circles that I was growing up in. And my dad liked the idea. My stepdad had kind of raised me with these cowboy mentalities. But my mom did not like that idea because my mom very much wanted to have this close relationship with me. She does not like not having a close relationship with me. Where my stepdad very much had always encouraged me, at the same time he didn't. He raised me kind of hypocritically, because he kind of always secretly seeded these ideas of becoming an independent individual in me, largely in part because that's what he had always wanted for himself, and he had chose otherwise. He had chosen to do the family thing for us. So it almost seemed like this thing that I could do to honor him and to honor myself and to kind of be this little adventurer. But at the same time, he also raised me to be a housewife and to be this very specific type of woman that carries herself a certain way, thinks a certain way, and serves people. So it was kind of an interesting balance there. But once I was living with them and started selling all my things, I was telling them, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and I'm going to live on the road. I'm going to learn skilled trades and I'm going to survive that way. That's what I want to do. My mom hated that, absolutely hated that. But my stepdad actually was like, oh, that's kind of cool. He honestly continued to encourage it. And what he told me was that he was obviously, and he had said it in front of my mom. Anytime my stepdad says something, my mom has to concede because he's the head of the household. So it really didn't matter how she felt about things. What he said was, obviously this is you're already selling all of your things. You're very dead set on this. We can tell. And there's very little, I assume, that we can do to actually try to keep you. So we're not going to try to stop you, but I want to, and then he basically just gave me this rundown and this really long conversation about how important it was that I didn't do this alone. That I found a man to do this with. There was a man that was with me that was living the same way. And I think he thought at the time that telling me that would kind of put in place an amount of time for me to work on building some type of relationship with some guy that I could do this with, and that time would end up revealing that this wasn't something I actually wanted to do, and maybe I would just fall back into a normal standard of lifestyle and, would stick around home. But instead, my adventurous ass decided, and listen, this is not something I would ever recommend. The story that I'm about to tell you will tell you exactly why this is not something I could recommend. I decided to go onto the internet. I went onto Facebook and started posting about my goals. And that I was selling all my things, and that I wanted to live off the road and learn skill trades, and that I was looking for somebody or even a whole group of people that wanted to live that way. Maybe there were people that I could, backpack off of, sort of deal, where I come towards you and then we meet up and then we go from here and do this thing, sort of deal, or whatever. But I was putting all of my shit out there. Looking for a partner in crime that way, right? And it didn't take long for me to have different people. I had 4 or 5 different dudes. I had a lot of girlfriends and guy friends both that were like, oh, this is something I've always dreamed of doing. That's so ambitious. I really hope the best for you if you actually do it. But nobody really took it fully seriously. And then I had about 4 or 5 different random dudes that seemed to take it seriously, but they just didn't jive with me. They really didn't seem to they just weren't as extreme as me, to be honest. They didn't get there how are we going to afford hotels? And it was you don't get what we're doing here. You really don't understand what I'm trying to do. Stuff like that. So there's this one dude in particular who I started talking to who seemed to get it. And the way that we kind of communicated back and forth with each other was extremely intimate, but also not romantically whatsoever. He was very business oriented that way. He kept things very professional that way. He was very direct. And he had his own ideas of these things. This is something that he already had been planning on doing, that he'd actually worked towards doing. He was ex-army, so he used to be in the army, and like he had all of these different skills to offer that way, and also these ideas of like survivalist, and that was more his concept. Wasn't to my idea was to kind of show people that you don't need to sell your soul for 40-hour-a-week jobs in order to thrive, in order to be able to do all these things you want to do. You want to make music, you want to make art, you want to be able to travel, do it. Do it. Just learn these different skill trades, work and build communities, and work within these communities in order to establish yourself. That was my end goal. His end goal was mostly to be a survivalist. But I loved that idea because I liked the balance of it, right? So we seemed super cohesive that way, and we talked for about 4 months, and I think at this point my parents kind of like thought that I'd gotten over this idea. I'd already sold all my things, but a lot of the things that I hadn't sold yet, I just put in their garage. And I wasn't really talking to them about it. So I don't really know where their minds were at this time, to be honest. But I talked to this dude for about 4 months when he and I made plans. And we're like, okay, we're going to do it. You're going to be the guy, I'm going to be the girl, and we're going to do this. He was in Baltimore. That's where his family's from, just like 15 minutes outside of Baltimore, 20 minutes outside of Baltimore, downtown. And he planned to come and pick me up in Wisconsin, where I was at the time at my parents' house. At the time, my parents lived in a townhome. And this is like this is November, I believe, in 2014 at this point, that he's planning on coming. Maybe the end of October. And he was planning on coming, and then we were just planning on pretty much staying in his car to get wherever we wanted to go, and then kind of going from there, but kind of essentially living out of his car. And that seemed like a stable plan that was sufficient, because I wasn't fully prepared to be on the street yet. I had no idea I didn't know the first thing about any survival thing. So his intent was kind of to teach me different survival techniques and tactics for a time while we were living out of the car, until I was in a position where we could both be comfortable being on the street then, and then going that route. And potentially at that point, we'd sell the car or whatever. A lot of our plans, a lot of our plans were very vague, and immature, to say the least. So he shows up. I tell my parents that he's coming, and they're not happy. I think, like I said, that they had kind of forgotten that this was something that I was trying to do, and or they thought that I was eventually going to like kind of get over it. When I was like, okay, this guy's gonna come pick me up and we're gonna leave and I'm gonna go live on the road, they were like, what the fuck? And I was like, what the fuck? I already told you about this. I've been planning on this for months now. I wasn't keeping them involved in my constant plans, but I'm a grown-ass adult at this point. I'm 24 and I'm divorced, separated at least. Like, you don't need to be involved in any of my plans, to be honest. Granted, I'm living in your house, but I'm also obviously trying to get out of it. So they weren't terribly pleased. And my stepdad was like, he's not allowed to be here. Like, I don't want him in this house. I don't want him here. And my mom was like, well, you can't be like that. Like, this is the guy that she's, going to be going on the road with. Like, we have to find some sort of compromise. And I remember being frustrated because I was like, they like flipped. Like, then my dad's upset, and my mom's like trying to comfort about it. They really, I think, just didn't know how to control me at that point and were scared of that. Again, I was a grown adult, but I was also raised extremely sheltered. So the idea of not being able to control me was like a constant concern of theirs, which is what was driving me away from them the entire time and still does. So the dude comes, and to be honest, like, okay, well, so we'd been talking this entire time and we had everything set, and we had like I said, not all of our plans were very well thought out, but for as much as I could tell, it seemed that those things were. And I was prepared, and my family knew that that's what I was doing. My sister-in-law got me ready for it. Like, you know, at this point, everybody's well aware of what my plan is and what I'm doing. They might not like it or agree with it, but it is what it is. But like a week, if even a week, prior to him coming, he decides, like a few weeks, maybe a couple weeks. No, maybe it was like a week and a half. Like he had only known this girl for a couple days, but he had met some other girl, through a friend, I'm assuming somehow. He didn't really get out much, but he met this girl who he was like immediately infatuated with. Had no qualms talking about that to me, which was understandable. We weren't going about this in a romantic way. I was open to things romantically at the time, at first, initially, but I also was totally fine with things not being that, and I really preferred to handle things in such a professional way. Since I've been divorced, that's mostly how I've handled all of my relationships. My ex was really the only one, I don't know. For the most part, that's how I tend to handle things to begin with. But he becomes infatuated with this girl. We're like, that's like all we're talking about now. Like, we're not even really talking about like all these plans. Like, it goes from us being very forward thinking to suddenly like, it's very much all just revolving around this girl. And I remember bringing that up to him, and he's like, well, that's because she's your white rabbit. And I was like, the fuck are you talking about? And he was like, she's part of this. Like, she wouldn't have come into my life at this very specific time and mean so much to me if it wasn't something that you also are connected to somehow. So like, that's up to you to figure out what the connection is that way between you and her. And I remember being like, is this dude tripping the fuck out? He's like, what? We had been talking this entire time, and we're already set, and like literally I've sold all of my things at this point, and we're a week away from him coming out. We've already planned all of this. Everybody's already aware that this is what's happening. And he starts talking about this girl. So I'm like, okay, let me figure out what the fuck, right? And that's what he told me I needed to do. She was my white rabbit that way. It's like, what is he fucking talking about, this white rabbit idea? Well, then, like, you know, like, that's, like, within the couple days. Well, then, like, within, like, 3 days of meeting this girl, all of a sudden, he's, like, not only is he obsessed, like, talking about her, but, like, he's talking different. He's being weird. He's given me some crazy vibes, and I really didn't know what to make of it. It was suddenly like, okay, this person that I just set all of these ideas for my future with is suddenly acting like somebody I don't recognize whatsoever. And I already don't actually know this person. I only know them online. So, like, I don't really know what to make of any of this. And he told me, like, she's not trying to be with me. Him. Like, he said, like, that she wasn't trying to be with him romantically. So it wasn't something that I could be jealous about. It was something else, and we needed to figure it out together. And I was just like, what the fuck is this? Well, then he lets me know. And now this is like 4 days before he's supposed to come. He lets me know that he dropped acid with her. And it's the first time he's ever done acid. And the morning after he drops acid, apparently he was tripping with her for like 6 to 7 hours. And then the next morning, he decided to smoke some sassafras with her as well. And he said that the sassafras is what put him on this, like, he felt like he was in Alice in Wonderland with this girl. And she became like this very integral part of him. And because I was connected to him, she was now somehow connected to me. And he was like, the whole time I was tripping with her, like, you were there in my mind. So, like, everything got intermeshed in this weird way. And I remember just being like, well, one, I was upset too, because we had already talked about drug use. I've never done acid. I still have never done acid. I have no desire to. But at that time, we had been talking about it. I only smoked pot, and he smoked pot too. And he had brought up the idea of using hallucinogens, and he was open to the idea of using them to kind of gain access to higher dimensions of thinking. And my concept pretty much always has been that if these things are just chemical reactions, although using the drug might be able to get us there much quicker, much easier, much more efficiently and effectively, I think that there's ways to get to those spaces mentally without the drugs as well. And like, because of just the way that I am in my head, like I struggled with mental illness my entire childhood. So like, I very much like to be in control of my own mentality and my own emotions in those types of ways. I can smoke as much pot as I can literally fucking take all day, every day, and still be in control of myself. At this time, I had never done shrooms or anything either. I have now done shrooms a handful of times. I've done small amounts, and I greatly like that. I enjoy them. I very, very much enjoy them. But I've only done them in pretty small amounts, like pretty average, small amounts, and I've only done it a handful of times. And again, I still have no interest in doing LSD. And he kind of was very interested in doing those things, but he had not done them yet. And I think he had done shrooms before and hadn't done acid and wanted to do acid. And we had planned on doing acid together. That was going to be part of our journey. That's going to be part of this whole process, right? Which I had taken some time to come around to, and then finally was like, okay, I think I can do that. You know, I'm stepping out on a limb. I'm doing this thing that's like, I've never done. I might as well do other things I've never done. I was willing to be open that way. But as soon as he told me that he had done it with this other girl, I just remember getting kind of jealous, and I was like, okay, so what about us doing it for the first time? Like, now I have literally no desire to do it whatsoever, because I already didn't have the desire, and the only reason I was going to do it was because it was going to be both of our first times. And now, not only did you do it with somebody else, but you're like obsessing over this girl now and telling me that I need to integrate her into my being because you did acid with her. Like, the fuck? And he was like kind of apologetic. He was apologetic about it. He understood my feelings about those things. He was also apologetic for the fact that he was kind of out of his mind. And he said, I'm sorry, I know that I sound really weird and that I'm talking really crazy. I'm not normally like this. It's because of the acid. He's like, I feel like I'm still tripping. And I was like, well, yeah, I definitely don't want to do acid. Like, that's always been my concern too. I'm already fucking out there. People assume that if I don't tell people I haven't done it, people assume I've done it, which tells me I don't need to fucking do it. I don't need to do it. I ain't trying to permatrip. But he was not the same. He just wasn't the same. And so then these few days go by and I'm like starting to get a lot of trepidations about just everything. And he's telling me it's all going to be okay. This is just part of the plan. It's going to be like a little journey, this little adventure. It's like Alice in Wonderland thing. And I'm just like feeling really, really anxious and really just like, I just remember feeling like scared, but I couldn't place why I would be scared. So I mostly just felt like anxious, right? I didn't really know what to think. But I also felt like an idiot. I felt like I had already let everybody know that this was my plan and this is what I was doing, and now this dude's gone and fucked it up, and what am I supposed to like let everybody know that I'm not doing this anymore and then just stay at my parents' house and just like restart over? I remember that feeling like it would be too much. However, even looking back on it right now, that's the whole reason I ended up getting married. I cried myself to sleep the night before I got married, and I remember being like, I did not want to go through with it, but I felt like I'd already gone too far. We'd already planned on this. Everybody was already involved, so I couldn't just say, you know what, I don't want to go through with this. So I just kept doing that and kept putting myself in really fucked up situations. This is why I ended up getting so abused so often by many different people. Because I would take it as my own personal responsibility and like, I must be a dumbass. I didn't set a boundary, so this is what I get. And so I remember him coming. Now, my family's not happy with me at all, right? They're not happy with this situation whatsoever. I'm not happy with it either now, though. I'm having to feign that I am just to make it seem like I know what the fuck I'm doing, because I'm giving up my entire life to start this whole new life, and I'm just so out of control at this point. Also, my depression was like at an absolute low. At this point in time, now I had been very self-destructive and given to self-destructive tendencies from the time I was 8 years old until I was about 17 when I started engaging in sex. As soon as I started having sex, I stopped cutting. But I had started cutting when I was like 10 with scissors, and then for the first time with a razor blade, I think when I was 13. But I had stopped that sort of self-destructive behavior when I found self-destructive behavior that actually felt good. So I started engaging in self-destructive sexual tendencies. And at this point, then I went to a 12-step program for my sex addiction, which was mostly for my porn addiction, but also for my sex addiction. Just all of it. I knew it was all part of it. And then I stopped going to the 12-step program because I got married and kind of just assumed that a monogamous committed relationship was equal to sobriety, which it is not. Only doing the internal work will heal you. You cannot cope through those things with external validation and external relationships. Nobody else is going to save you. It wouldn't have even mattered if that would have been a healthy relationship. It wasn't going to be a healthy relationship because I wasn't healthy. And so then getting out of that, obviously, like, I started falling back into this depravity, this sense of depravity, and was like willing to be with just people that I didn't even find attractive at all, just because they were willing to be with me. And like, that's why I wanted to get on the road too. I just wanted to cut all of it. I just wanted to sell all my things. I wanted to stop all of it. I wanted to get away from all of it. But then I fell back into this toxic mentality of, as long as I'm in a committed relationship, I can engage in certain types of things. And I really didn't have a sense for myself. I did not have healthy boundaries for myself. I didn't care about myself. I started to get depressed again, started to have suicidal ideations again, and I was suppressing all of that by looking for these goals and by looking for these things outside of me. And when I found this dude, I kind of like latched onto him in a weird, toxically codependent way in order to be able to continue to suppress that depression. But I remember just being like, if I stay here at my parents', like, I have to go through with this. I need a change. Because if I stay here at my parents', I'm going to end up killing myself. The whole time, anytime I lived with my parents, I wanted to kill myself. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. Anytime I was close to my family, I wanted to kill myself. And it kept getting worse and worse. My whole life, I literally had, for the first time, tried to kill myself when I was 8 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. It was not going to be effective. But even at 8 years old, that was already where my mindset was, right? So I was extremely unhealthy. I was extremely mentally unwell. And yeah, I just didn't know how to come to terms with myself and how to swallow my pride at that time. And I was absolutely lost in myself. And I had all these different people with all their different opinions, but nobody actually trying to help me. You know, nobody was willing to see me and to get to know me and help me get to know myself enough to be there for me. Also, I was raised with people that, you know, deny that psychology is even helpful. They believe it's from the devil. So obviously I was never going to get any psychological care from my family because of their religion. And, you know, I kept myself entrapped in my family to the point where I think other people outside of, even very closely related to the family, but right outside of my very intimate family, they weren't aware of how much I was struggling, and they weren't aware of how bad my mental health was. So this guy shows up. He drives all the way from Baltimore, and he shows up. And I'm just feeling all of these types of ways. And I remember he gets there at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was excited because I was just like, just hoping that this change was going to change my life, that it was going to make everything better. And so my sister-in-law had given me the dress that she wore to marry my brother, to wear for the first time meeting this guy. And she had like helped me like pluck all my facial hair and shit. And she did my hair for me and she got me all dolled up. I was super, super dolled up in order to see this guy. And he shows up at like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I think maybe I got dolled up the next day even. I don't remember. I can't remember if I was dolled up right away or if it was afterwards. I do remember him not liking it. He never liked when I wore makeup. He didn't like when I wore dresses. He didn't like when I had my hair done. He wanted me to look very, very plain, and he had no issue setting that standard. It got far worse the longer the relationship went on. But he definitely did not appreciate the work that I'd put into trying to make myself look some type of way for him. In fact, it made him insecure, and he did not like it. But I remember when he had shown up, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and he pulled up, and I was outside waiting for him. And he pulled the car up on the side of the road by my parents' townhome, and he got out and he left the car door open, the front door open, and he got out and he like rushed over to me to hug me, and he was just like so excited. He wrapped his arms around me, and I wrapped my arms around him. Like, I haven't even looked at this dude yet, right? I haven't even seen his face yet, and we're touching. I have such a hard time with physical contact now. Like, I'm aware that I have had a habit of just being able to hop in onto people's dicks, but at the same time, I struggle with intimacy these types of ways, for these reasons. And that was the thing too, because we had talked about that, where he was like, I don't want to engage in a romantic relationship. I don't want that to be what this partnership is about. I want to have a true partnership with you where we are equals. I don't want to let toxic codependency be a part of this. I want us both to have our end goals and for this to be about the work that we're doing, and this to be about learning skills and being able to work as equals. And he was like, but obviously as a man and a woman, there's going to, at some point in time, come that issue of sexuality between us. And he's like, so I think it's best that we just get it over with right away. We'll just knock it right out of the park right away, and then we won't have to do it again after that. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can see that. That makes sense. And you're right. Like, that'll help, to not have to feel those things anymore. And then we've both seen each other in our most vulnerable states. We already know each other biblically. So yeah, maybe that's the right way to go about things. And then I remember even I had told my ex-husband, me and my ex-husband were hanging out prior to me leaving. And he was dating another girl already at this point. He started dating a girl immediately after we separated. He had already been interested in this girl, and that was why we ended up separating ultimately. So he was already dating this girl, but we would still hang out. And he was like, I told him about this guy. I told him about my plans to leave, and then I told him about that where I was like, well, the guy wants to have sex. He was like, well, I would just recommend not making everything about sex or not jumping into bed with him right away. And he's like, because that's what we did, and I think that that's what ruined our relationship. It ruined any chance of me actually taking you seriously. I never had respect for you because of it, to be honest. And I was like, well, I mean, I get that, but at the same time, this is what he explained and why he thinks that that's fine, My ex-husband was like, I mean, do what you want. Obviously, you're an adult. I'm just telling you that, I really don't think it would be the best choice. And I think that if that is what he wants, it doesn't really say anything good about him. I think that you need to really consider what it is that you're doing with this guy. And he's like, because there's crazy people out there. And he was like, there's guys who, can't get a girl where they're at, and they literally will drive halfway across the country to be with a girl. So just, be careful, But at that time, I'd already set these plans, and I was like, okay. I mean, I remember keeping that in the back of my head the whole time, but I still had already planned to go forward with it, and I was like, well, it's fine. I just didn't know myself at all at this time whatsoever. And let's be clear that this was just over 10 years ago. So a lot can happen in a short amount of time, and you can get to know yourself and through. Well, this was like the fast track to getting to know myself, this experience. So dude shows up. He's all excited to see me. He gives me this hug, and then he's like, it was cold outside. It's November in Wisconsin. So he's like, oh, let me run back to the car, whatever. He's like, I'm going to go grab a blanket. Essentially what he was saying was like, I'm going to go grab my blanket from the car and we can go out into this field and fuck. Like literally right away. Like, I don't want 2 seconds with you before we just get this in. And I just remember having like, as soon as he hugged me, having these chills through my body, not even because it was cold. I was like sick to my stomach, nervous. I did not feel well. I didn't feel good about any of this. And he runs to the car and he grabs a bowl with some pot and the blanket. Or I think I had a bowl. I think I had the bowl with me. He grabs the blanket. We go out to the field. He lays the blanket down and then gets on top of it and like leans back like, okay, do me. He's not even like, he's still wearing his clothes, but he kind of just like expected me to just like do everything. And I remember just being like, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And I just remember the whole time being like, I can't believe this is what I set myself up for. And like, even before he laid the blanket down, he had it wrapped around him. He like wrapped it around him at one point because it was cold out, but he like wrapped it around him. And I remember seeing him like all happy and stuff and just being like, I was really bothered by his energy. It was not attractive to me at all. It rubbed me as innately effeminate, which I know if he heard me saying that, it would be violently upsetting to him. But it did. He seemed very effeminate to me and just kind of off. And I remember thinking like the way that he was talking and stuff, and like because he hadn't come down yet from the acid that he did with that girl like a week and a half prior, he was still talking so weird. And I remember just being like is he still just on drugs, or like what if he's like schizophrenic? Like he doesn't seem mentally right. But then I was like, well, I'm not mentally right. I fucking set myself up for this shit, so like who am I to judge? And I remember being like, I can't like send him away. If he really isn't mentally well, like I can't just send him away, like, and take that responsibility. I remember just feeling all sorts of ill about it, all sorts of sick. So then he lays down on the blanket, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm really not ready yet. Can we just like smoke for a minute and just chill out for a minute? And he was like, I guess. Like, it's cold out here, though. Let's go to the car, and we can smoke in the car, and then we can go from there. And I was like, okay. He was not happy about it, to be clear. Like, and he let it be known right off the bat. And it was kind of just like, I guess I can appease you since you're the woman that I'm trying to be with right now. But, like, it was obvious that, like, he didn't like that I was an actual person and not just a trainable object. Which, like, granted, I was raised as a trainable object, and I've definitely had my fair share of men that view me that way, so I totally got it. I didn't hold it against him as much as he was holding it against me. We go into the car, and we're smoking, and I remember just, like, wanting to, which I'd done in a couple situations before where I'd been extremely uncomfortable and felt like I was about to be assaulted, and was just trying to, like, I didn't know how to speak up for myself at this time. So I used to, like, have this tendency of, like, using the pot in order just to be like, oh, we're just smoking. And I could smoke a lot of pot. So I would use that as, like, this, like, deterrent almost, right? And, like, oh, well, it's not done yet sort of deal, right? But he got, like, as the sun was coming up, you know, because now it had been a couple hours, he was getting very anxious. So he was like, take all your clothes off. And he just took all his clothes off. And I remember like kind of going slow, and then he like started like taking my clothes off for me because I wasn't going fast enough for him. And I just was not comfortable at all the entire time. Now, I never vocalized that. It was quite evident in my body language, but at the same time, I had already told this dude that this is what was going to happen. That I was okay with us banging right off the bat. That was the plan. You know, we had talked about it already. That was the plan. So this was me feeling some type of way, but your feelings don't really matter. We already preset this. So we had sex in the back of the car and then got dressed, and I smoked another bowl. He didn't want to smoke anymore. And at this point, like, he chilled out a little bit. After we had had sex, he chilled out a little bit. But I remember then, like, seeing his face in the light of day, where it had been dark the entire time. It had been dark when he first got there because it was very late at night. And it had been dark this entire time, but now the sun is up. And it's technically daylight. And I remember seeing his face in the light of day and like just being extremely bothered. He looked very different in person than he looked online. And, you know, I had thought that I knew what he looked like, but I didn't really see him in the dark. And now that I was really seeing him, he scared me. He honestly scared me. But who cares if I'm scared? You know, this wasn't the first time I'd ever gone through a situation like that. I had been forced into a lot of different sexual things most of my life. I wasn't even fully conscious of that, of the fact that I was a victim of those things. I didn't view myself as being victimized by these things. I felt victimized internally, but I'd even been told when I had expressed different situations that I'd been in where I'd been forced into things. I talked about it with my stepdad when I was like 19 or 20, and he let me know that none of those things were rape or assault because I hadn't vocalized accurately and properly that I wasn't interested, or because I had prior vocalized that I was interested and then had just changed my mind. And that's not on them, that's on me. And I could accept that, but I just didn't know how to properly stand up for myself at the time. And so I did take it onto myself. Like, well, I'm not standing up for myself, so he's not the bad guy, I'm the idiot. I remember just like suppressing those feelings at that point in time. Then he was like, I was like, okay, well, you know, you should probably come in and meet my family now, you know, because you're here and we're going to be going off. So he came in. My dad didn't even want him in there. My dad was fighting with him and pretty much told him that he didn't want him in the house at all. That he wasn't welcome in his house. So he went back out to the car. And I remember being like, okay, then I'm just going to pack up the rest of my things really quick and we're just going to head out. And my mom was like, Greg, to my stepdad, like, don't be like that. Come on, like, she can't just leave right now. Like, you just got here. Like, we have to get to know this guy. She's going to be living in her car with this dude on the street. Like, don't just send them away like this. Right? So my stepdad concedes a bit, and he invites Kevin back in to talk. Sorry. And they start talking, and Kevin says some shit about how naive I am, essentially calling me an idiot. My dad, which is so crazy because, like, it was no different. It was not anything that my stepdad hasn't alluded to me, or if not literally said to me in my past. They might as well have been the same person. They had such similar personalities. But I think that's what bothered my stepdad too, because I think that seeing me with this man that was very much like him and that was talking to me the way that he had always talked to me really triggered him. I had never seen him like this before. I guess the first time he ever met my ex-husband, he threatened him too, actually, now that I say it. He literally, the one time he ever talked to my ex-husband, the only thing he ever said to him, I'm pretty sure, ever, was he went up to him and he said, she isn't, until you put a ring on that, it's mine, in reference to me. Or my pussy, I guess, since that's all these dudes care about, including my stepdad. Also, these men like men. These men don't even like women. They hate women. They don't respect women. They view women as objects, and these women are objects to use to make themselves appear different ways in front of the men that they're actually attracted to. Let's just be clear, but I digress. Kevin had said something to my stepdad that about me. My stepdad would wanted to hit him. That's like his move. This is my stepdad, like constantly threatening to punch people. He almost got fired at work for it. He's literally always doing that, raising his fist like he's gonna punch you. Just very intimidating. That's his thing. He's such a Kyle. And Kevin was not intimidated whatsoever. And I remember that really pissing off my stepdad. And he was like, I don't ever want to hear you talking about my daughter like that in front of me again. Kevin was like, okay, well, we're not going to be in front of you much longer. Or my dumbass is just going to go with all of this because I had no self-confidence whatsoever, no self-esteem to speak of. I shouldn't say that I'm a dumbass for that. I'd literally been trained to not have my own self-esteem by the very man that's upset now that somebody else is taking over his job. But I digress. So we stayed in his car, slept in his car, and pretty much just stayed around the house, but weren't in the house. There was one time that my mom let him come in to shower. My dad happened to come home. My stepdad happened to come home in the middle of the day, and Kevin was in the shower. And my stepdad had heard that the shower was running and saw that I wasn't in there and that my mom wasn't in there. And he was like, I swear if that guy is in my shower right now, I'm going to have a fit. And my mom was like, he needed one. Like, we can't just not have them. I don't want them just to leave. So then we had to have this discussion because, like, obviously then it just became an issue. He was trying to fight with Kevin as soon as Kevin got out of the shower. Then Kevin's all mad and trying to leave again. So then we sit down and have this conversation where my mom's like begging me just to let Kevin go back home and just to not do this. And she's like, you know, her mom at the time was sick with cancer. And she was like, my mom is dying and I can't handle that. And now you're trying to leave and I can't handle that. And I can't handle any of this. And like, please don't do this to me. And I remember just being like, okay, but like you literally put all of your problems onto me and make it to the point where like, because you can't handle anything, I have to handle everything. And that's ruining me and I can't handle being with you. So like, I can't be here. I need to go. And she was like, well then, you know, can you at least like just wait until after my mom passes? And I was like, no, I can't. He's already here from Baltimore. Like, he's not going to go home and then come back. I'm going to have to start all over again. Like, there is no way around this. This is what has to happen right now. Or it's not happening. And then I'm probably going to end up killing myself because I can't be around you. It was a lot. And so Kevin was like, well, how about we go back to my parents' house and we stay with my parents until your grandma passes. That way we're not on the road. We're not out on the road. Your mom doesn't have to worry about where we're at, what we're doing, how we're surviving. She can know that we're somewhere safe until her mom passes, and then we can go. And he was like, you know, we can just do training and stuff until that time. We can both work to make enough money to be able to travel and everything. And I was like, okay. Okay, fine. That seemed like a fine compromise. My mom wasn't happy with it, but I figured that anything would be better than living with my parents. Which is so crazy because honestly, like as fucked up as this situation was, once we went to Baltimore, like it was better. It still somehow was better than it would have been at my parents'. I would not have survived living at my parents' house. There's no way. I would have killed myself. So as fucked up as it is, I am still thankful for these situations. So we go back to Baltimore. He lets his parents know that that's where we're going to be doing. And his parents kind of just let him run the house. So they're like, okay. Apparently, it had lived there with another girl before, anyways. So they were kind of like, you've already done this before, and it was real toxic and stuff. And he's like, yeah, this is different. We're only gonna be there for a time. It's just until her grandma passes. Like, and his family's like, okay. It's his mom, his dad, and his little brother that live there. And his little brother is an adult. We're 24, 26. I was 24, he was 26, and his brother was 21, I believe. 20, 21, something like that. So his parents are just like, okay. His parents live in a townhome too, right outside of Baltimore. And they're just going to have 3 grown adults living at their house. But it was funny because it's not much different than what it was at my parents', where it was me and my brother, who is 5 years older than me, you know. And like just prior to them moving into the townhome, all 3 of us, for a time, right before I got married, all 3 of us had moved back into. I hadn't left yet. Both of my brothers had moved back. So even my parents had grown as adults, all living with them, their kids and stuff like that. So like, I don't know. I just find that shit ridiculous. But so we go to Baltimore, and we live with his family. And I stayed there for 11 months. And that 11 months was one of the craziest times of my entire life. Largely in part just because of how much time it was, how long I was actually in it. Most of the fucked up situations I've been in have been for like an hour, a couple hours, a night, a few days, even a few months at this point, but not almost a whole year. So the shit was wild. This is about to run out of memory, so I'm going to save this, and then I will do a part 2 where I explain everything that I went through. And it will be very much like an Alice in Wonderland tale. And then we'll go from there. All right. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in part 2.